Okay, thank you very much for coming along, and thank you to guests, particularly Camden, for joining us. This is sprint number 3 of 5 sprint phase. And this is where it starts getting exciting, and you can start things start getting built, and there are tangible outputs from here on in. Click. So again, team plus LASMA. So we'll add you to the that slide as well. Click. So this is what we're going to cover today. Quick overview of the work, what we've done, what's coming next in this phase, and then any questions you might have. So just to recap, the whole point of this work is how might we get clear and accurate and live, and that's the important bit, live data on affordable housing. So in order to track the properties in perpetuity once they're delivered. And just to make clear and reiterate again, there will be a minimum viable product at the end of this. So it won't be the big all singing, all dancing, shiny, blingy thing that will be voice controlled, but it will be a minimum viable product that you can use and will give results.
Thanks, Jack. Hi, I'm Alex. As Jack said, we are just over halfway through this phase of work. So we've just finished the third 3-week sprint out of 5. This is our outline sprint plan and sprint goals that we established right at the start of the phase. So, as I say, we just finished sprint 3, where our goals were to develop interfaces for external users and to test approaches to reporting and visualising data. On to the next slide. We didn't make as much progress on testing approaches to reporting and visualising as we would have liked. What we have done is we brought forward work on developing change history for pre and post completion, and in this sprint we've done a lot of really valuable thinking and designing that mean that in the next sprint we'll be able to really churn through the development backlog.
Hey, I'm Gaz. So on the middle Wednesday of our sprints, we have what we call a design review, and that's an opportunity for us all to get together and, as a team, kind of assess the progress of the sprint, change course on a few things if we need to. And the review that we had during this sprint, we tackled 3 things, and that was, we had a review of a microcopy of the site, which means we looked at the things that our form pages show users, so things like form labels, error text, hint messages, that kind of thing, to make sure they're as good as they could be. We also had a discussion about statuses of developments. That's an ongoing conversation. There's still quite a lot for us to chew over there, so we've decided to have a separate session dedicated to that next week, which we'll do some collaborative whiteboarding on. And we also talked about scope, talked about the things that we think it's necessary to get into this version of our prototype, and talked about the things that can be de-scoped slightly when we move on to the next iteration.
Thank you. So hi, I'm Daria. We focused, as Gaz said, this week on understanding what this minimum viable product looks like and which questions we're hoping to answer in precisely which order. So we're starting with focusing on what affordable homes have been agreed. At the moment, there's no way of capturing all of this in a machine-readable format, so that's our first priority. Once we've answered that question, we can then answer, have developers delivered what was agreed? Because we have that data then captured, so it's easier to check back on it. And the third question is, what happened to the affordable homes after they were delivered? And the final point is, can we monitor all affordable housing? Now, the order of this is really important. Next slide, please. Because we can't do 4 without doing 3 first. So although we really want to monitor all affordable housing, it's currently not possible with the data that we're capturing in the systems that the planning team are using at the moment. So we do think we can provide a live service that answers each question in order. And so to kind of illustrate that, we've got this diagram which sort of demonstrates what an agile working approach looks like. So historically, you would have created something in the top part of the diagram which doesn't get you from A to B until the very end. Whereas what we're hoping to do in the bottom diagram is get something that's like a very basic version of what we're trying to achieve from the first moment. And so you're delivering value within each sprint. And so the current level of refinement that we're at for each of these questions is we've kind of got a bit of a scooter going on for the first point. So we know that our service already, with what we've built, will help capture and store in a machine-readable format what affordable housing has been agreed between the council and the developer. And it also captures the development as it progresses from pre-agreement to post-completion, as well as keeping a change log for any changes to the agreement after it has been agreed. So you have some sort of rationale for what legal changes have happened throughout. And so that's already, we think, at quite a high level of refinement. Whereas the second question of have developers delivered what was agreed, at the moment we're still working on that. We've got a developer completion form that they can now complete when the building is finished, and that will capture the addresses and the registered provider for the agreed affordable housing. Now this is miles ahead of what we were capable of before with the systems that we already had, so we're getting to like a good level of refinement. But for the third question of what happened to the affordable homes after they were delivered, that's where our relationship with Peabody, that we'll talk about in a minute, so we're still developing that functionality. And can we monitor all affordable housing? Well, none of that can happen until we're really at a higher level of refinement for all the others. Thank you. So we're hoping to capture for the third and fourth point, the registered providers will update us on any changes to the dwellings after they're delivered. We're hoping that we'll be able to capture when and how affordable housing leaves the system. So again, we've got a relationship with Peabody to start defining some of these things. And we're hoping to help flag fraud and also report on policy effectiveness. And then for the final point of can we monitor all affordable housing, so now that we have a process of getting updates from registered providers, we can explore the potential of expanding the scope to answer, to update all of the affordable housing that we have in Southwark. And we can do that by capturing the addition of affordable housing that happens outside of S106s, and capture the loss of affordable housing, which at the moment, again, there's no way of doing for all affordable housing. Oh, sorry, so there's one more point. And that makes all of these things possible in the future, which at the moment, again, none of this can be done until we've done the first 4 points.
Hi, my name's Adam. I'm the researcher on the project. One of the things that we've been doing every sprint is testing the service with actual users. So this has predominantly been case officers from within planning. And we've very grateful today that Lasma, who is joining us, who's one of the people who's been testing the service, to show you how it works from a real user's perspective, as opposed to one of the development team showing you the product. So what we're going to do, if you click the slide, is we're going to look at entering some data into the system, get an idea about how long this process takes. It'll also show some of the usability issues that users such as Lasma have identified, and how we've then iterated the product and put these through into the service so they're now ready to test next week.
All right, that's my cue. So as Adam mentioned, I'm a planning officer here, so I guess this will be something that I might use in the future. So it makes sense that I've been pretty lucky to test this prototype. So what I was asked to do was kind of interact with this prototype, which allowed me to try and see what happens when you create a new development. So I'll quickly show you how that works. So to add a new development, you click on add a new development. You type in a planning application number, random at this point, site address, a better looking one, and a proposal. And here you've created a development that will at some point in the future we'll have a legal agreement where a certain number of affordable housing is agreed. To add those units, then you can go into manage dwellings and simply add dwellings. For example, one open. And here's a thing that is actually something when I used the prototype in the first place that I thought would be quite a good idea if we had a reference to each of the units, which is something that developers use in their plans anyway. So units are usually referenced and they use a referencing system. So actually to be able to better track which units are in certain tenure or what habitable rooms they have, you might be able to then actually refer to the unit reference that the developer is using on plans. So for example, if that was referenced as unit 1, you could add that. And then you know that that is the unit that you're referring to, and you can go back to plans and check which one that is.
So at this stage, it's worth pointing out that there's 2 additional data fields here. There's address and registered provider. As we're at the point of the agreement of the S106, we know that the individual unit doesn't have an address yet, but this is something that we will be looking to capture later once the development is completed. Similarly, with the registered provider, at this stage there may not be an actual registered provider for the affordable housing units, but that again is something we want to record later down the line, which is why you can see those 2 fields yet labelled as not yet supplied.
Cool. And then one of the things that I wanted to test with this prototype was really answering the question of how long it takes to input this data manually. So I created an entry for one of my ongoing applications, which is a real application. It's a proposal for 61 units. Went in and added each of those units. As you can see, 61 entries, and it took me 12 minutes. So actually, not as much as you would expect. At this point, it did not have the capability of adding a reference number, so I guess it would probably take a little bit longer, but realistically, it may not be as long as we think it is, and for the minimum viable product, this is a great result.
And we'll be planning to do some additional testing of entering data, such as Lasman's done with some other users from tomorrow. So we can get further perspective on how other people feel about the length of time it may take to enter developments with the number of dwellings that this one has, for example.
Cool.
Okay. Thank you, Lasma.
Yep.
Hello. So I'm James. I'm the software developer, or a software developer working on this. So we go to the next slide. So I kind of want to show you behind the curtain a little bit here, just to kind of show that we're writing production-ready software. It's real. You know, this is happening, and also we're coding in the open, so anyone can see it, see all of the code that we're developing. So Camden can have a look, or anyone else. So if we just go to the next slide. So you'll be able to see that, you know, every day we're committing code and it's being there, and not only can you, but anyone else can see all the changes that we're making. So if you could quickly click on that, if you go back and click on this. Yeah, just on the image. You can see that this is a public code base. And if we were going to click on, so you notice that we've added a name field to each development. There you go, that shows that it happened. I did it 5 hours ago. Explains the changes there are, and if you're interested in the code, then the code is there, so you can see all that's happening. Thank you, we can go back. And on to the next slide. Thank you. So not only are we developing this code in the open so that other councils can see the sort of work that we're doing, or anyone else can see what we're doing, and things can be reused, we also use open source software ourselves. So for all of the changelog stuff, I'm using a library, an open source library for auditing. You may remember last show and tell, there was a somewhat ugly error message when you didn't provide a change comment. That was actually a bug in the open source library that we were using, but because it's open source, I can put in a open source, like a pull request to that central library. So not only have I fixed it for Southwark, I've also fixed it for anyone else in the world who wants to use that library. So I'm quite pleased that quite early on in this development cycle, this project is already contributing to the open source ecosystem. On to actually what we did this in terms of features. Shall I take over the computer? Yeah, I think I might take over the computer for this bit.
Do you want to sit down?
Yes, please. And could you hold this? Thank you. So, as I said, the major bit of work that we did was around the developer response form. So we left off before around the fact that we don't have the addresses. But you'll see that once we've marked a development as completed, once we've kind of know that's happened, we then generate this sort of hidden URL. So it's not guessable, but it's a URL that we can then send to the developer and ask the developer to fill this in. So I would be, as a case officer, grab that, message the developer, say, you need to fill this in. They would then type that URL in, and we say, because we had all that information in machine readable format, we can then tell them back to them what we agreed with them at the start of the planning application. So we can see here that these are the affordable housing units that we agreed, and then they can give us the address of each one of them. So they'd go like, oh, there's a social flat that had 1 bedroom and 3 habitable rooms. Give us the address. Tell us which of the registered providers that that have housing in Southwark it belongs to. So I'm just going to very quickly fill this in with kind of fake data. They can half fill this in and it will be saved as it is, but tell them that they haven't finished. So they can half fill it in and then come back. I chose one that had too many houses. There we go. And so we submit that response. Live
software people.
Live software. It worked just before. So that would have... Damn. See if there's... So here's one that someone did respond with. And then they would then know, the case officer would then know that the developer has responded and would be able to see that information that has been returned. And in that way, we'll have all of that information. I'm annoyed by that. Onwards.
We've also been working a little bit with Peabody as a registered provider. So they volunteered some of their time to help us understand the data that they hold on and how they record affordable housing. So we've received some sample data from them, and it's really to give us an idea about what the data fields are that they use within their system for reporting and how that could then be reported out and used by ourselves, by Southwark, and the affordable housing monitoring service that we're building. So this is just a set of dummy data, but it gives us a good idea about the quality of the data, the fields, and for example, if we look at something like the 10 years, how they are recording 10 years, which might be slightly different to how for how Southwark, from a policy perspective, are recording 10 years. So we know there might be then a potential piece of work around there. The other thing we want to do is understand how housing enters and exits their system, because they might not hold all of their housing in perpetuity. So they might sell some of that housing at some point, for example. So these are some of the questions that we want to work with them to better understand how their data is held and stored and monitored. So we will be having a meeting with them this week, where a few of us will be attending to have a bit of a deeper dive into their data to see how best we can work together to use that data from Southwark's perspective.
So just a little note on what's coming up in the next sprint. So this morning we held sprint planning, and these are some of the research activities that we've prioritised for the next 2 weeks. So we want to explore multi-phase developments where affordable housing may be present in one or more than one of those phases. And we also want to explore off-site provisioning where affordable homes are not provided in the development that they initially relate to. So we're going to be doing that with the strategic applications team. Adam's mentioned the work with Peabody, which will include building up our understanding of affordable homes that are secured or come into the borough outside of Section 106, so potentially through acquisitions. We'll be exploring the information for Section 106 officers. What data do they need to see? What visualisations do they need to see? How can we best present that to them? And we'll be evaluating the proposed process with Ian in street naming and numbering and potentially building control. So research activities leading to development priorities. So these are the development priorities for the next sprint. We'll be connecting multiple legal agreements to a single development. We'll be developing tenures and products within the service. Search, was mentioned earlier, the microcopy for changelogs. We're adding real user accounts, so case officers in Southwark will have their own accounts for using, and statuses and flows, which requires a little bit more thought, as Gaz mentioned earlier. So that's it. Thank you.